This is Frank Maskins, co-organizer along with Johanna Shapiro of the 4th Annual Symposium on Healing and Hope. This is a bit different than the last 3 times because it's virtual, and it's the first time that we've ever done a virtual poetry symposium, and there's been very few done anywhere. So everybody's been provided already your packet with the agenda, the biography of the poets, and as well as the poems themselves, so that if you want to see the poems, you can look at them as we go along, but so much of poetry is reading. The questions, if you have questions, please go into the Q&A and put it there. And at the appropriate time, after the poet has given his or her reading, Dr. Jayne Lewis, who is professor of English and has worked with us on all the other symposium, will lead that into discussion. Secondly, and most importantly, is that for the first time ever, we're specifically addressing the issue of diversity and inclusion, and we're very pleased to have several poets of Latino and Black backgrounds, and a couple of them are pretty complicated, and they may or may not comment about that specifically. So I'm going to read 2 poems, and they're about as diverse as you can imagine. Both came about in December, when so much was happening with the pandemic and our world, the politics, and they're about as different as you might imagine. The first one is called My Healing Anodyne. A lot of people probably don't know, including me, didn't know what the word anodyne meant till about a year ago. But it's a very interesting word that's used in many different languages. And it's a way of expressing discontent, but in a nicer way, which I thought was nice. And also it can be a substitute. For example, instead of using the word drug, you use the word medicine. So think of that as I read this poem. My Healing Anodyne. Healing is an ancient art, long practiced around the fireside in times of disease and damage, from whatever the cause therein. And we moderns find a way to enlightenment as science unveils secrets that underlie causality, leading to drugs and other potions. As the healer in the white coat builds trust that enables me to be probed and prodded, my corporeal being aching. But when the moment became dire, your hands covered mine, and I feel you once again, my loving anodyne. Hope restored, and healing begins again. I might tell you this was dedicated to my wife. The second poem is at the opposite extreme, and it's called The Newspeak Mask. Many of you probably know the word newspeak because it was the language of Orwell's 1984, and it's actually been picked up and used in certain circumstances now. And it's my commentary on the future of the mask. And it's about as depressing as you might imagine, to be the opposite of my healing anodyne. The Newspeak Mask. Now your mask protects me from death transmitted in the air. Eyes playing hide and seek with emotions. Tonal melodies communicating the mood of the moment. No touching in this new world. Hugs condemn truality. We become muggers of empathy, obliterating kindness and compassion. But now my mask shields me from digital algorithms on the hunt searching for identities to condemn each one of us as we enter an Orwellian tomorrow. Jayne, you're up.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Johanna Shapiro. I'm one of the co-organizers, and thank you, Frank, so much for those very different but very thought-provoking poems. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dr. Thelma Reyna. Coming from a large and poor family in circumstances that made her parents high school dropouts, Thelma Reyna was raised in part by grandparents who had no formal education. Although she entered school with very little English, she went on to become the first college graduate in her family and earned her PhD from UCLA. Dr. Reyna is the author of 6 books of poetry and has edited 3 anthologies that comprise about 200 authors. Her fiction, poetry, and nonfiction have appeared in literary journals, anthologies, textbooks, and blogs. Collectively, her body of work has received 18 national literary awards. Dr. Reyna served as the Poet Laureate for Altadena, California, from 2014 to 2016, and she was a Pushcart Prize nominee in poetry in 2017, which is very impressive. Dr. Reyna has written fearlessly about love, grief, and hope. Her poetry also tackles such subjects as the former president's period in office and COVID-19. Her writing, as you will discover, is beautifully crafted, elegantly lyrical, and always distinctive for its truth-telling. Asked to say something about herself, Dr. Reyna writes, "I've always been passionate about writing and the influence that our shared ideas have upon our culture, our civilization, and people and the choices we all make. Plus, literature, especially poetry, brings immense beauty and wisdom into our lives." Finally, although she was not able to have pets as a child, Dr. Reyna has shared her home with dearly loved cats and dogs for 40 years. Dr. Reyna.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shapiro. My thanks to Dr. Maskins and Dr. Shapiro for their talented staffs for bringing us together today for such a momentous purpose, to talk about and share what I consider the most human, the most insightful, the most glorious, most authentic genre of writing, poetry, and to talk about how poems are often the go-to balms to mitigate our stabs of loss and grief. I speak to you today as a poet, but I am also a prose author, essays, short stories, book reviews, opinion pieces, etc. You know, the type of writing that consumes most of our daily human communications. But that is not, I believe, on par with the compressed power of poetry. And this is why, when I experienced the greatest loss in my life a couple of years ago, and it happened like the proverbial thunderbolt from the sky, I turned to poetry to take me through the journey of grief I faced. In February 2018, my husband Victor and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. We had come a long way, rising from poverty in a small Texas town, he the son of a Mexican immigrant who had never attended school, me the daughter of Latino parents who had dropped out of school to marry and then went on to have 9 children. Amid the trappings of low expectations and constant struggle, my husband Vic and I were the first in our families to earn a college degree. We married, moved to California, and started building a better life as teachers and starting our own family, building our own legacy. Proud grandparents of 3 angels, Vic and I celebrated our fortunate lives in our 50th wedding anniversary in 2018 and looked forward to much more joy and success. 8 months later, my husband died suddenly in minor outpatient surgery that was scheduled to last only about an hour. We had a dinner date that night. Throughout my life, when grief had struck, I wrote poems in my shared bedroom as a teen or late at night after work, wherever I could sit and weep privately and let my pain pour forth. But for Vic, who lived life with me through the proverbial thick and thin, I knew I wasn't just writing a poem about him. It had to be a book, and a prose memoir about his life would not have cut it. So I wrote Dearest Papa, a memoir in poems, and I want to talk to you a little bit today about that. And this is the book, Dearest Papa, a memoir in poems. I began the book 2 weeks after Vic died. We all called him Papa, by the way, because that's what our grandchildren called him. So every adult who knew him eventually forgot Vic and went to Papa. I knew that this journey of grief facing me would test me like no other when I made that decision. Now, mind you, I wasn't a stranger to loss. At my age, we've seen a lot of this. Lost so many classmates, colleagues, neighbors, relatives, close friends, that sometimes we're shocked to remember that a person we used to live next door to, or that we used to teach with, or carpool with, is no longer walking this earth. And I'm referring to long, long before the pandemic struck. Now many of us are numb with loss, astounded at how swiftly life can be crippled, maimed, weakened, and terminated. Before I lost my husband, I had lost everyone in my parents' generation. I'd even lost 2 brothers, one in Vietnam, the other to drug abuse. We writers, especially we poets, weave grief and loss so closely with our work because these are often so closely interwoven in our lives. Life is not possible without the constant partner of loss in some way, some shape, or some form. But it's hard to foresee the gigantic emotional gash that the loss of a husband of 50 years of marriage can inflict upon us. One of my strongest memories of this pain was the first day when all the faraway friends and families who had come to my husband's funeral returned home. The very next day, my house that had been so full was now empty except for me. The palpable stillness when I woke that morning, alone for the first time since the funeral, the utter lack of movements, of sounds, the coldness in my room, the silent phone, all imprisoned me in bed, beneath my blankets, weeping softly and unable or unwilling to rise and begin the day. So I knew that writing my husband's memoir would not be easy. I had committed to doing this in my first year of mourning, however, because I felt that facing loss and grief head on, not trying to pretend or to quote, quote, be strong, or to sweep such loss under the rug as a minor event so as not to elicit pity from those who knew Vic and me. No, I knew from writing other books that seeking clarity or deeper clarity, engaging in reflection about who or what we're depicting in print is part of gaining deeper understanding of that person. I want to state up front that a year of grieving is unpredictable, with some days harder than others. Sometimes we poets like to think that all our writing is at least somewhat planned out, that we have a list of ideas or preliminary lines for all we write. That is not the case for me. I remember this one poem from my book in which the suddenness and chaotic way inspiration comes is depicted. It's a short poem and we have time, and I would like to share this poem from Dearest Papa with you. It's called How Poems Are Born. While walking room to tuck bed sheets in around the edge, to wash my cup in morning light of sink, drop soiled laundry in the tub, wipe coffee stains from tile, sweep lint from sofa cushions crumpled flat, fill cubbies with his books. Fingers, hands, legs move like motons clearing dust, while poems rush in like fools, disembodied, spinning reels of recollection, stringing phrases, weaving words he spoke, parsing empty spaces of the life lived here, making sense of him and me and death.
And I'm sorry, I just turned on my screen because I wanted us to just celebrate how beautiful that was.
Yeah,
and how beautiful the program has been thus far, and just highlight the level of grief that she just brought us into, and the fact that she enabled us to step into a place where she was willing to be vulnerable and to speak to, honestly, one of the things I know some of us will all speak to, which is just navigating grief and how poetry can be healing. And just wanted to pause and kind of rest in that for a moment.
I'd like to share with you some other strategies that I have used to help me identify, examine, and process my grief as I mourned my husband. Now, I need to warn you, they may sound easy to do, but because we are dealing with grief and writing poems and channeling that grief, they are still painful to do sometimes. Number one, let's start out by documenting our grief. To commit to documenting our grief, just to commit that we are going to do this helps to meld our poetry and grief. Commit to tackling the pain, to pinning it down on paper. Doing this forced me to focus, to center myself, because my overarching goal to commemorate Vic, to depict for others his goodness, was my gift to him, my tribute to his life. So each day I awoke with the purpose of this, to reflect on him, what he said, what he did. I even phoned my son and daughter one day and asked them what events or attributes of Papa most stood out in their memories of him. I turned those into poems and added them joyfully to my book. Number two, I also counted on something that I refer to as sheer remembrance. Remembrance. Purposefully bringing up memories, reliving them, meditating on them, focusing on these memories with a sharper lens. And I found that this eased my pain. So I took out old photos of Vic before he became Papa and gazed long and wistfully at his face, his clothes, remembering what he was like as a young father, a young husband. And I saw details in these photos that I had not fully noticed before, or that I had forgotten. And my joy in discovery and rediscovery and admiring what I was seeing soothed my soul. The sheer remembrance, by the way, also resulted in me being able to add several ekphrastic poems to the book. And for those of you who may have forgotten, an ekphrastic poem is about a painting or a photo in which the author, the poet, goes beyond what is seen and interprets or analyzes or injects some life or feeling into the piece of art. So I did that by reminiscing and remembering through my husband's photos. Number three, a big, big balm to me, not only with this book, but actually with all of my books, anything I write relating to grief, is being outdoors. Being outdoors in nature soothes our spirits tremendously, especially taking long walks, a simple thing to do. Ask the great poet Mary Oliver about this, and she will tell you that observing nature and writing about nature for her whole brilliant, beautiful career literally saved her life. She says it saved her life emotionally and spiritually. This is what kept her going. This is what soothed her. The healing power of poetry is often most manifest when we sit and watch and listen to nature, to the winds, birds, bees, to feel our faces bathed in mist. Our sorrow seems to flow out, and describing nature often becomes a metaphor for describing our emotions and lives, our duties, our responsibilities, our grief. Just ask a great poet like Robert Frost when he wrote Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And finally, number 4, go for catharsis, full-on catharsis, the release of pent-up feelings and fears and sadness, grief, anything that is hurting your spirit. When we let it go, and writing is oftentimes a way to do this, to release that. This is what I mean by catharsis. The quickness and the immediacy of a poem versus a long essay, let us say, makes a poem the perfect vessel for containing and spilling our deepest hurts and fears. In a compressed space of a poem, this poem relays our anger, outrage, our pleas for greater humanity, for peace, for justice. Poetic license is what catharsis can give us when we do this. Let's talk a little bit about this catharsis. In a moment of needed catharsis, when we are bursting with sorrow, weeping uncontrollably at the illness or death of a loved one, or bursting with anger at what corrupt officials did to starving families and what they do daily to those amongst us who are the most vulnerable, who bear the brunt of suffering. Yes, these are wounds. Thinking about this, let your deep wounds tear open and write, write, write. Among poetry's greatest beauties are its infinite formats, short lines, even just one word per line, or long flowing lines enwrapped around each other, around stanzas, with language of all levels, musicality like rap, or solemn cadences of funeral marches. Poetry, I believe, is the most democratic, the most non-judgmental, the most egalitarian form of writing. And even if it's simply for the sake of catharsis, my dear friends, open up the gates and write. In my book, Dearest Papa, the cathartic poems were often the most hurtful to write. In some cases, I'd be curled in a fetal position on the floor by my desk, sobbing uncontrollably. With many poems of grief and loss, you need to set aside such a poem after you write it. Let it cool down, walk away, go outside and walk around the block, sit quietly in nature, sit on your back porch and weep. Take as long as you need. Remember that healing takes time. And if you just now wrote that poem and you just now started your healing with this cathartic poem, take it slowly. Grief is grief. No hurtful loss is a small, unimportant loss. Any one person's angst and pain is significant and worthy of empathy. Whether a lonely runaway teen is suffering in an alley, or a tight-knit family is torn asunder by the loss of their father, or immigrant children are grieving their separation from parents through no fault of their own, or an entire nation is mourning the deaths of over 500,000 people to coronavirus and inhumane politicians. The magnitude or economic cost of loss and grief are irrelevant to us. As a civil society, we must mark and commiserate with the human losses and the pain. Finally, to wrap up, just remember that loss is an inseparable part of life, and we poets are very well equipped to handle it. As a matter of fact, poets are often referred to as the first responders in a crisis, historical, social, medical catastrophe. We have seen it in this pandemic, and it has been thus throughout civilization. We poets are first responders. We are accustomed to loss. We know how to picture it. We know how to depict it, and we know how to present it in the midst of our grief. So what methods are best for you as you do that with your poetry? The answer is simple. The methods that are best for you as a poet is what is most authentic for you as a poet. We all have different modorandi, we have different styles, we have different preferences. I just want to summarize some of the things I've suggested in my talk with you tonight, but you do what you think is best for you. Number one, embrace your grief, tackle it head on. It won't be easy, but this is the only thing that will lead to healing. Number two, expect randomness and chaotic inspiration and poetry coming to you, sometimes at times in mundane moments when you're not prepared for it. Number three, engage in purposeful reflection and reminiscing to awaken memories of your loved one or of your suffering one, your lost one, to awaken memories of forgotten aspects that you loved and that you shall never forget. Next, turn to nature for balms and for seeing the connections between the natural and human worlds, for they are many and they are strong. Next, use writing for pure catharsis. When in pain, sit down, take a pen, take paper, open up your laptop, and write, my friends, write. And finally, but not least of all, empathize with other people's pain. Accept that loss is inseparable from life, but may you never forget your compassion and your humanity. I would now like to read two poems from my book, Dearest Papa. So let me share these with you. They were inspired, actually they deal directly with Dr. Susan Kubler-Ross, who was an iconic medical doctor, and she was an expert on death and dying. And if you ever hear the 5 stages of grief and loss, denial, anger, depression, acceptance, resignation, I know I'm probably making them out of order there. This is from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. This poem here, This Is How Grief Goes, is actually one of the stages, the stage called depression. And what I did is I read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book on the 5 stages of grief and loss several times. And for each of the 5 stages, which are not linear, by the way, I transposed the main points of that particular stage of the grieving process and turned it into a poem. And this is called This Is How Grief Goes. And I have an epigram on it. It says, when we are grieving, people may wonder about us and we may wonder about ourselves. And that is a quote from Dr. Kubler-Ross from her book. And here's my interpretation. When loss is swift, when it strikes like a viper in a pot, blunting hopes and well-laid plans, the hole that swallows us is bottomless and fierce. Emptiness unspools like mummy's tape, endless, frayed, muffling, gagging, dooming lips and eyes to tombs devoid of words and light, stripped of loving hands, caverns of ululations. Loss flattens us, but this is how grief goes. This is how we sink to rise, how brokenness is patched together again, how despair ultimately defies death. My second poem is in reference to the final stage of the grieving process and the 5 stages of grief and loss per Dr. Kubler-Ross. And this particular stage is called acceptance, resignation. You just have to live with it and move on. And I call this poem Piecing the Breakage. There comes the day when we resign ourselves as Hindi brides stepping into the pyre to the impermeable. The cudgel of loss has struck and it will not unswing itself.
Hi, Johanna. I thought I would join you.
Good.
I wanted to echo what Candace said also the last time that we lost Dr. Reyna, which is, how important it is just to appreciate the profundity of what we've been hearing and the vulnerability that lies behind it and the power of simply acknowledging that through language. So I've been very, very, very moved by everything that she said. And I feel very deeply taught by it. So I hope she comes back so that we can, let her know this.
And Jayne, I just wanted to piggyback on what you were sharing too, when she was speaking about like, what is your authentic self? And she said, what is most authentic to you? Embrace grief and tackle it head on. And I was like, wow, do you know the source of a lot of my poems? Like, how did you know? And so it was just validating, I think, to hear her perspective and to honestly just rest in this place of the fact that we can lean into words that are compressed, to use her words, like it's just compressed words are so powerful and impactful and bring a depth of ourselves into an openness where others can absorb it as well and relate. And I think that it's helpful to hear such a phenomenal scholar and poet really speak to what I think I experience when I try to be a poet, if you will. So it's wonderful to kind of step into her thoughts.
Candace, it's really interesting to hear what you zeroed in on, because one of the, I know that she writes fiction as well, and I identify more as a fiction writer, but have found in, the current pandemic, that poems are just a much more natural form of utterance, and I've been trying to understand why that is. And she also mentioned compression as one of the elements of poetry, right, that makes it particularly helpful and powerful in managing. Oh, Dr. Reyna, we were just talking about.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if you heard the last line of the poem.
No, we would love for you to read your second poem again. We kind of lost most of it.
Thank you. Luckily, it's short. Thank you so much. And I apologize. I don't know what's going on with my computer here.
Thelma, do you want to try turning your video off? That'll probably make it more stable.
All right, let's do that. Okay, this is Piecing the Breakage. There comes the day when we resign ourselves as Hindi brides stepping into the pyre to the impermeable. The cudgel of loss has struck and it will not unswing itself. We grind teeth, gird tired loins and plod on, blind, limping, bleeding, broken, or miraculously soothed into the new what is. Piecing the breakage together again may take priests, imams, wizards, shamans, or crystal ball gazers, elders, lovers, books, pilgrimages, or whatever trods the journey of loss with us. But the journey has been walked. All roads face forward from here. Was that okay? Did it come through?
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure that you were completely finished before I dropped in to respond and ask for responses from others. So those were astonishing poems, Dr. Reyna. And I teach, as Frank mentioned, in the English department here, and I'm moderating the responses. I wanted to invite people in our audience, who I wish I could see, again, to, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And in a moment, I'll turn to those and relay those to Dr. Reyna. Yes, so, and Julia's also just reiterated what I just suggested. But I cannot tell you how grateful I am for those poems and for the kind of masterclass in managing grief that you just gave us. I just feel so grateful for this. And you know, I feel with grief, it's so important simply to name it. So often it's what we're feeling and we don't even realize that that's what we're feeling. And I think that's also one of the, you know, great powers of poetry. When you had disappeared before, we were beginning to speak a little bit about something that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, and which sort of came in and out, and it had to do with the specific power, what it is exactly about poems and poetry that make it so the most useful and powerful way of addressing the kinds of depletion and loss that you are exploring in your work. And Candice had mentioned compression, and you know, there's the management of time. And in the first poem that you read, there was that sense of the ways that the words that make a poem birth themselves, and you know, that there's a kind of assistance simply in the action of language. One of the things that I did want to ask you about, even before hearing what you had to teach us today, it had to do with what exactly it is about poems and poetic language. I think to some extent you addressed that already, but I'm just wondering if we had, if you were to you know, sort of summarize what it is about that form of expression. That is so.
Thank you. I think that's an outstanding question, and I believe that a lot of folks would have different responses to that. I personally believe that the process of writing a poem is distinct to me from writing a research paper, a dissertation, a newspaper article about the news, because those are very cut and dry. Those are concrete. They are dealing with something that is, something that happened, something that's identifiable, it's concrete, it's measurable. Whether it's an accident, you know, a Tiger Woods accident, or the pandemic vaccines, or whatever. But when we sit down to write a poem, it is like we're standing in front of, you know, the proverbial giant blank canvas, and all that we have with us, all that we know, is whatever the motivation is in our minds. We're sad because the best friend died. We're worried because Tiger Woods is injured. We're angry because 500,000 Americans plus have died and they didn't need to die. So whatever that driving force is for us to want to create a poem, we have much less material to work with than the prose writers do. So this is where our innovativeness, our life experiences, our philosophies, our ethos, our morality, whatever, this is where all of that kicks in. And it's almost like meditating. You have to think deeply. A famous haiku master from way back many centuries when it was first being created allegedly spent 30 years writing one haiku, writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, because in poetry, every single word is usually what creates the impact, what distinguishes one poem, one poet from another. So we think more about our word choice in a poem. We feel more free to express our angers and our fears and our many emotions. And we are just more freed up to delve deeply into areas of our humanity that we don't talk about on any, you know, on every day. So it's that introspective, free reign aspect, wanting to be precise with the pictures we paint, the words we use, the emotion we want to create. So to me, it's a much more artistic thing than the newspaper writers, and I like them too. I have a degree in journalism, but poetry is more abstract, and it's harder to create, I believe.
I am so glad I asked you that question, because you're really speaking of the ways that we authentically come into poetry from a position of loss and from as much from what isn't there as from what is, and that creates such plenitude. Thank you so much for that. And I have a million other questions, but I do want to take a question from our audience because we have several here. So I'm going to, I think we'll only have time for one if I understand this. So I'm going to take the first one from Chloe Lowe. Her question is, the comment is, thank you for your beautiful presentation, Dr. Reyna. I would like to ask if you have any motifs or themes you use throughout your poetry.
Well, that's another excellent question. Nature is a very strong. I'm not at the level of Mary Oliver, whom I love so much. I just love her.
Oh dear. And so I'm very sorry about that, and maybe we can return at a later moment in our evening. But yes, so we will be moving on to the next segment of the evening, community voices, and the poets will be essentially introducing themselves and contextualizing their work. But I will say, before I disappear from the screen again, in anticipation of a poet, I'm just really, really, really eager to hear and see. So this will be Jameel Rankinekurlu, and she will be sharing with us a couple of really powerful poems. I've read them already, and I'm so looking forward to the performance of them. So I'm going to disappear, and Jameel will appear, and it will be fabulous, I'm sure.
Hello, hello. I can't see myself, but I'm assuming all is well.
We can see you and hear you. Thank you, Jameel.
Fantastic. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jameel Devengaye Anita Rankinekurlu. You can just call me Jameel. I am a Jamaican-born writer, storyteller, fashion designer. Anything to do with the arts is my passion. I am a mother, a wife. I have 2 children, Noble, who is 2, Zar, who is 9, and my amazing husband and best friend, David. I am so honored to be here this evening to share my poetry with you, to be able to just express a piece of me and my story. One of the poems that I'll be sharing is called Sankofa. And a little bit about what Sankofa means. Sankofa means go back and get it. It is actually from a Ghanaian language, from the Akantwai language of Ghana. And it means looking back, moving forward. And as you see here, I have an image of the symbol, which is a bird with its feet facing forward as its head rears to the back and holds an egg, which to me means what is to come, the birth of hope, the birth of healing, the birth of ideas, the birth of growth, and just finding who you are. And so I would love to share this poem with you, as I mentioned, called Sankofa Said the Wind. Sankofa said the wind. I found myself staring at the wind, captivated by the way she moves, dancing back and forth, sharing stories as she grooves. I began to listen closely. The story was clear as day. The journey will be rewarding, she said, but you must look back the way you came. I thought to myself, why look backwards as my feet proceeds north? Will I not fall or get confused, not remembering why I was moving forth? The wind kindly answered as she gently brushed against my skin. In order for you to grow, you must be willing to look from within. You must revisit your past, but there you should not dwell. For your past is filled with history, so rich that you must tell. To truly appreciate where you are going, you must first acknowledge where you have been. There are lessons in your mistakes, valuable to making you win. So dance, wind. Dance! My zest trembled the leaves. If I do the same, no more will my joy be stolen by life's thieves. That's doubt, fear, self-loathing, and my regretful thoughts. The price for life to be purposeful is free of cost. She told me the journey will not be easy, but it is filled with many rewards. Your choices will be made clearly, and you will know exactly what you're moving towards. I thought to myself once again, this must be why the wind likes to prance. Sankofa, looking back, moving forward, gives our lives a better chance. Thank you. Did we hear the wind speaking here? Did we hear the wind? Amazing. My second poem that I'd like to share. First, a little history on Sankofa. I shared Sankofa at my church, Christ Our Redeemer Core Church in Irvine. And I was asked to write a poem about the theme, which was Sankofa, and I had no idea what Sankofa was prior to that. And I did my research and I thought it was just beautiful because I found that I was discovering those things in my own life where I'm at a place where it takes looking back to some of the mistakes we made to learn and grow and how to move forward, right? And we as a nation can definitely look back on some of our past mistakes and see how we can heal together, see what we missed and bring it forward into the future and the present. And also, I also take Sankofa as you strive and you become, let's say, successful in where you are in life. It's always important to look back and pull somebody up with you. You know, look back and see who you can bring forth. I was born in Kingston, Jamaica. And so I come from a third world country. And so it's so different from here in California, where I reside now. And I always have to remember where I'm from. And so it makes me so much more grateful for where I am. You should try it. My other poem that I'd love to share with you that I believe is a message from my heart on ways to heal and ways to find hope is called No Longer Empty. The tears I cried no longer flow from my eyes, for I am no longer empty. I have used them all and have washed away my sorrows, buried seeds that grew into thick skin, clothed myself in zeal, for in this life I was destined to win. I knew this day would come. Although I ran from it as the moon does the sun, chasing a happy ending, but carrying my cross, there was none. Or at least that was the story once written. Twice shy, once bitten, learning from my mistakes, loving myself no matter what it takes. You see, the devil is a liar, sitting low as he bounds, but the creator sits higher, with plans to prosper and give me hope, direction and purpose you can't find in a horoscope. We all have wounds to heal, but fear the scars they leave behind. A tornado of whether to forgive or forget intertwined. Too bad in life you can't just press rewind. One foot in front of the other and then repeat. Perspective is the only difference between victory and defeat. And with that said, I choose to feed only the constructive thoughts that take root in my head. No longer empty. From me, adversities and self-destruction fled. No longer empty. To the Holy Spirit, I am now wed. I am no longer empty. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
If I
Jameel. That
must
was
share,
beautiful.
absolutely.
Marcus, can we hear from you? If you could unmute and turn on your camera.
Hello. There we go. Hi, everybody. So glad everyone is here. My name is Marcus Medford. My stage name is Mars the Poet. You can find me on Instagram that way. I am a freelance journalist, editor. I do a bunch of things, really. But I have been writing poetry since I was 12 years old. In 2016, I self-published a collection of poetry called Book of Mars. I have also been featured in a couple of publications and anthologies. I've been lucky enough to give 2 TEDx performances at the university that I went to, which was an incredible experience. I was saying that I do several different things because the first poem that I'm going to be reading is a piece called Lily, John, and Lucy. So when I'm not doing poetry or journalism, I work with kids as a camp counselor and a sport instructor. And the names Lily, John, and Lucy come from a camper that I had the first year that I worked as a camp counselor, Lily, and her mother and father. Lily was at the camp for the whole summer, and she was always there longer than any other camper. So I got to know her really well because I was one of the campers that stayed late. And at the start of the summer, she was very reserved and shy, and John, her dad, told me that at home, Lily was very quiet and he didn't always know how to talk to her. So he was really glad that by the end of the summer, she had learned some new skills. She was just very silly and fun. So he was very happy to see that that she was able to do that because he wasn't able to talk to her or understand her in the way that he would want. And it just made me think of the fact that having healthy relationships with your family can be hard, like understanding that your parents are people rather than just authority figures. And despite people's good intentions, it's impossible to avoid being hurt or hurting members of your family. And sometimes you won't be able to understand your family. And sometimes you yourself are the one that is misunderstood. So this piece is in part about acknowledging and accepting that fact. And also recognizing my own thoughts about love and familial relationships. Ironically, the poem is a modified version of a Corona sonnet or a crown of sonnets, where the sonnets are connected by a line that appears in each sonnet. I've taken a little bit of liberties with it, but that's okay. So this is Lily, John, and Lucy. Baby girl, the world is yours. Oh, wait, sorry. A man must be gentle but strong to raise a daughter. I will do so long as I am your father. I want to help you grow, but what can I do that your mother can't? There's so much I don't know. Help me to understand how to give you affection, but let you find your own strength. You need, hold on, sorry. Sorry, I'm gonna restart that whole thing. Oh my goodness.
You know, Marcus, I think we are all moved by your being moved. And it reminds me of what Thelma said, that poetry both contains and has our emotions spilling over. And you know, I think it's that spilling over of feeling that poetry evokes. So you know, I know this can be kind of embarrassing, but it's also really beautiful that your emotions are kind of overflowing, which I think helps us with our own emotions as we listen to you. So, you know, if you think you can manage it, please try again.
Okay, so John. A man must be gentle but strong to raise a daughter. I will do so long as I am your father. I want to help you grow, but what can I do that your mother can't? There's so much I don't know. Help me to understand how I can give you protection, but let you find your own strength. You need space and affection, so I'll go to any length. Just know that I love you and that you are precious. Beautiful daughter whom I have been blessed with. Lucy. Baby girl, the world is yours. You can achieve all accomplishments. You are smart, beautiful, and competent. Of that, I am sure. Do not drown when they pour on you adoration and compliments. Have strength in your own consciousness. Smile. Know what you stand for. You may never plan to raise a daughter. You might not want a baby. Just understand that there's many ways to prosper. So be your own lady. Lily. Mother and father, give me direction to be a mountain, but free as water. Help me grow as I go farther through the trials of adolescence, through even the toughest questions. Was it a bother to raise a daughter? Did I waste your affection? Does love make you strong or weak? Could it be both, maybe? True to myself, I will keep and live my life bravely. I see that the world is my oyster. I just want to be happy and be sure. Lily, John, and Lucy. Thank you. For this next piece, this is called COVID-19. And for me, the pandemic has had three distinct phases. The first phase of the pandemic lasted for about a week and a half, where it felt like it was just a mini staycation because everyone's place of work was closed down for a couple of weeks. And in my mind, by the time we got into April, things would be opening back up and things would be back to normal relatively soon. The second phase happened right around my birthday. And that was realizing that we were going to be in this for a while. That's when the death toll in places started to really rise. And I think the fear started to set in. So the second phase was realizing that things were much more bleak than we first thought. Phase two was lonely, it was stressful, uncertain, and hopeless a little bit. And that is where this piece comes from. This piece started off as a 30-day writing challenge in April, where I would add at least one line every day. But in May, my paternal grandfather passed away, which was less than a year after my maternal grandfather passed away, and I ended up writing the eulogies for both of those funerals. And after being invited to this event and reflecting on the funerals and the eulogies that I'd written, I decided to return to the 30-day challenge and turn it into a poem. And that is a poem that I'm going to do for you now. It's just called COVID-19. Searching for the key to social cohesion, enamel, an antidote, stripped of love and left alone with no company but his reflection, he stood wounded, waiting as the world turned. No one is ever prepared for the earth beneath their feet to give way, but disasters set like fog, and refuge is just an illusion. Even the sun's light is fleeting and everything feels futile. Memories clamor in the distance, don't look, fix your face. What choice do I have but to redeploy my heart when normalcy has been destroyed, discarded, and left for dead? Even oxygen tastes foreign. I'm restless, broiling beneath the surface on the precipice of an eruption. I'm seething with guilt and shame, but if you ask me how I'm doing, I'll say I'm fine. I've yet to find my inner strength. I've become adept at self-deception. I find myself fantasizing about silence, moments of respite found only in the margins. I wish I was a magician who could pull time out of a hat. That way I could love every second. I'd go visit my grandfather, trace his hard but kind hands with my fingers. I would coach, I would give back, I would fight for animals and the environment, for equity. I'd be the friend I know that I should be. I'm tired of hearing words like morale or being told that I have to rally. Suddenly I have to psych myself out just to survive. I never signed up to be a soldier, but that's the nature of war, I guess, all-consuming, constantly looming threats. Unwelcome yet shows up at your door, tracking mud onto porcelain tiles, a collective stain on our memory. COVID-19. Thank you. Oh.
Well, thank you so much for taking the risk to push that through, Marcus. That I think that poem captures, at least for me, so much of the experience of the last year. And I know I'm very grateful that you had the courage to say these things so we could all release some of the emotion that we carry. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, because really, especially with COVID-19, that is what encouraged me to kind of reframe the way I was thinking about the pandemic as a whole. So that was part of my healing process for sure. And phase 3 was just kind of realizing that, you know, we're in this and you just kind of got to push through it, and things will get better when they get better.
Things will get better when they get better. A good motto for all of us. So I'm going to move us along. My name is still Johanna Shapiro, and I too write poetry, usually to process events in my own life or others' lives in order to help me understand them more deeply. You know, I was very, I really resonated to Thelma's statement that poetry both contains and spills our hopes and fears. It reminded me of one of those metal colanders that if you turn it a certain way, it can hold the liquid, and if you turn it another way, the liquid just streams out. And I think that tonight, I keep returning to both Marcus's tears. Thank you for those tears. And that image of Thelma curled up on her floor writing poetry. I think somehow those images speak to the heart of what poetry is all about. The particular poem that I'm going to read is based, as the title says, on a horrific skateboard versus car collision that I actually witnessed on Pacific Coast Highway right before the pandemic struck. And I think, like many of us, I too often see things as isolated incidents. In this case, perhaps a tragic and horrible incidents, but separate from any more troubling patterns. It was only later, as I revisited this event, probably trying to deal with my own secondary trauma, that I was reminded about how closely everything is tied together with everything else. Writing this poem helped me find that larger picture, and the central image of the poem, an injured child splayed out in the road, spoke to me painfully about larger societal injustices. Accident on PCH. We are sitting, drinking coffee, laughing, talking about our kids. The day is bright and happy. The air is crisp, the sky blue, the clouds white, the trees green. The people around us are laughing too, glad to be drinking coffee on such a day. Then a thud. We all look up, laughter interrupted. First, we see the car at an unnatural angle, the driver already halfway out lamenting. Other cars are stopping too, brakes squealing with annoyance. Only later do we see the kid scattered in the crosswalk, the skateboard upside down, wheels still spinning. The kid is Black. I am not. Through my caffeinated shock, even as I pull out my phone to call 911, I realize I'm seeing this tragedy through the cotton padding of my white privilege, as I inevitably see all the Black men and boys and women sprawled on a road somewhere, or a sidewalk somewhere, or a park somewhere, or an apartment somewhere, killed by something more cruel, less random than a car. Still, I dial the phone and gather with the other white people standing around the boy, telling him it will probably be all right when it probably won't be, waiting for the people who love him to appear, waiting for the wailing and the anguish to begin again. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. If I could just invite Jameel and Marcus to come back onto the screen, and Dr. Reyna, Thelma as well, perhaps. I think we wanted to be cumulative. That would be wonderful. So we can have everyone here. And again, to our audience, if you want to type in something into the Q&A, I will absolutely field those. I saw that one person already responded after Marcus's first poem with, that was incredible. And it was also so credible, so deeply believable. And thank you so much for your courage and willingness to be vulnerable, and for those powerful poems. Jameel, thank you for your splendor. I learned so much from what you had to say. And Johanna, thank you so much for your honesty and your willingness to try to peel away a little bit of that white cotton padding. Anyway, I want to go into the Q&A rather than, I actually have a question for everyone, but I want to make sure that the audience gets a chance as well. And so I'm going to go right into that. So I want to start, this is a question from Manek. And she says, I agree with Jameel about not forgetting where we come from. I myself keep in touch with my home country of India and my religious community of Zarathustra's Zoroastrians, as Greek philosophers called us in India, providing help through our organizations in the USA and UK. I came to the USA as a grad student in engineering. How long ago, this is a question for Jameel, did Jameel come to the USA from Jamaica? Did you have cultural shock in your new home? So he's asking very much about what it means to move from one world to the other.
Well, thank you for that question.
Jameel.
Answer. Thank you for that question. I saw that it froze just now. I'd be happy to answer that. I moved to the States when I was 18 years old. Not gonna say how old I am now, 31, but so it's been a while that I've been here, and I would travel to the States when I was little prior to moving here permanently. So I was familiar to what to expect, but yes, there was definitely a culture shock. Just how big everything was. It was definitely difficult to consume all at once, but over time, I found my place here. My family is here still, so I still get to speak Patois, which is Jamaican dialect, which is it's Patois. So I still get to speak that a little bit here and there, which makes me feel a little bit at home. So yeah, it definitely was a culture shock, but I love being here in the States. I feel like being here there's so many more opportunities, so many advantages that I can earn, and hopefully, as Sankofa suggests, turn back and bring it back home, which I have actually started to do. I started a nonprofit and I was able to raise money, and I went to Jamaica in 2018, and we were able to go to a low income community and feed the kids there, and we incorporated arts, and we danced and we sang, and it was just such a good time. We wanted to show the kids alternatives to expressing themselves. And knowing that you can make a living being creative, knowing that you don't have to go down the narrow, dark road. You can use your gifts and find your peace. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And we have a question from Bondi. It wasn't addressed to any specific writer, but maybe all can answer, which is simply the question, when did you begin writing poems? I think that's actually a wonderful question. What pushed you into this world that you all inhabit so beautifully?
I'll go ahead and answer that, and then I guess the others will share their story. I always journaled when I was little, and I didn't know I had something going until I was in high school, and I had an English teacher who, when I would write my stories in class, she would always just be so fascinated by what I wrote, and I just thought, okay, it's just a story. It's like, it's not a big deal. And I would sometimes try to like miss her class, and she would hunt me down to make sure I was there. And I thought she was the worst teacher ever. I was like, why is she bothering me? Why is she But then I realized she must have seen something in me that I took for granted, my storytelling abilities. And it just led from journaling. And then there was someone who I looked up to. I went to them and I said, I want to start writing. And he said, well, you can start reciting Maya Angelou, who I adore. And I said, well, what if I wrote my own poem? And he almost laughed. He was like, okay. And I said, I think I could do it. And I wrote a poem called Skin, and I said it to him, and it blew him away, and it almost brought him to tears. And then I thought, wow, maybe I have something here. And so I kept writing, and just all the stories I had bottled up inside of me, I just started putting it on paper. And I found so much solace in it and so much peace. And I just never stopped. And I want to continue to do so, and hopefully have a book of anthology soon that I'm working on. And let's see where it goes.
Yeah. Marcus?
So I similar to Janelle, I started writing like short stories, and I transitioned into poetry from elementary school. The first poem that I ever wrote was a birthday gift for a friend, like a little acrostic poem. And it was, I think what I liked about it was they really liked the poem. It was something that was unique and no one else could give them. And it felt nice to create something. Yeah, that was really it. I had a teacher in grade 7, and we had a poetry unit, and we had to research a poem, and I ended up researching a poet from Trinidad, which is where my mom's parents are from, and a poet from Toronto. And just learning about their lives and the work that they did was really interesting and really inspiring. And so I just started writing from there. And then as the years progressed, I started taking it more and more seriously. And I ended up putting my book together because I lost my job. So that's my story.
This is your work now.
Much more rewarding.
True, it's your vocation.
And I guess like other poets here, I started writing at a very young age too. I was actually living on the island of Barbados. Jameel, you may, it's not that far away from Jamaica. And I was probably feeling pretty lost as a kid, taken into that unfamiliar environment. I started writing poems then and kept it up pretty much until I was in graduate school. And then I thought, I'm becoming a serious professional here. I better give up these childish things and focus on research. And it took me probably another 20 years to return to poetry, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I started writing when I was in Presidio Junior High School because growth was delayed and I was bullied. And the teacher asked in our English class for us to write a poem, and but to read it to her privately because she knew that some of them might affect her. Well, this one made her cry, and I've written on and off ever since then. But really began rewriting again in the year 2000 because of a particular patient who awoke my consciousness again.
I think that idea of returning to the child is really powerful. We're a little behind schedule, but I did want to bring out a couple more questions quickly. They're really wonderful. This one is from Jayla, and it is for you, Marcus. For Mars the Poet, as she says, I have a question for Mars the Poet. I'm very curious about why Mars and the implications of conflict in that, but that's another question. Her question is, how did you come up with the format and structure for Lily, John, and Lucy? And I too was very struck by the formal discipline of your writing. So I think that's a great question.
First of all, thank you. I've always been kind of interested in more like classic poetry. So things that are more structured. I really do enjoy sonnets. Why I chose to explore it like that, there was a period where I was really just looking at a bunch of different forms, and I heard about the Corona sonnet. And when I had the idea of talking about Lily, John, and Lucy, even though I never met Lucy, so I had to kind of make her up, it seemed like the connecting line of the Corona sonnet was a really good way to kind of show that these three people they're all related, like through blood, through love and children. But it just seemed like a really interesting way to explore it. And the last sonnet, Lily, that is a mix of the Shakespearean sonnet and the Petrarchian or Italian sonnet. So it's kind of to show the marriage of those two different forms to create this person that is a combination of the two parents. So that was the main reason actually why I wanted to tell it like that, because it was easy to show the two structures coming together to make Lilith.
That's really wonderful. And I think also obviously the uncanny resonance of Corona sonnet with coronavirus can't go unmentioned, right? But the sonnet's a form devoted to love, and that is what comes through so profoundly in your poems. So I think that's another reason that form works so beautifully. I will just one last question. This is for Jameel, and then we'll move on. And this is from Gabby, who writes, Jameel, your poem was so powerful. I'm shaking thinking about it. It feels deeply that your poem was birthed out of a deep embodiment to a felt sense of this idea you presented of looking back. Oh dear, I'm losing my screen here. Sorry, that just disappeared. Sorry, let's see. Oh no, I've lost that. Oh, I'm sorry, there it is. Sorry, Gabby. Let's see, I'm looking back and looking forward. Also a spiritual connection first. I'm curious how that is true. And if so, how did that felt sense evolve or work with the process of editing, refining, and shaping this into a poem to be heard and spoken? How do you merge this inner spiritual world with publishable work? And I think she's also asking about that of rewriting and looking back on your poems and also looking forward into the world that's reading them. So we'll end with that question because we do need to move on, but Jameel, if you would like to respond, that would be really great.
Absolutely. What a great question. Thank you for asking that. My spirituality, my love for God is my everything. I'm literally nothing without my love for God and what God has done for me and where he has brought me from and where he has placed me. And so it was fairly easy. All I had to do was just feel. I just had to feel, and I had to start looking, being grateful. And so the small things became large, and I was just so filled with so much gratitude. And the idea for actually writing Sankofa came about. I was sitting in my car and I knew I wanted to write this poem. As I mentioned, it was for a previous event. And I wanted to see what would come. And that's how the Holy Spirit works, right? It just shows up in the most opportune time. And so I was sitting there and I saw how the trees were just blowing. And I thought it was just beautiful how it just swayed. And I felt like it was dancing and it was telling me a story. And then I started hearing that story and I started writing this story of this conversation I was having with the wind. And I called it She because of just its gracefulness and its power. Just much like us women, right? Where sometimes what we do is not noticed or even acknowledged, but it's so prominent, it's so life-changing, it's so necessary. And so I just felt and just wrote what I felt, and it came through in the way it did. When I write, I never know where it's gonna go. I just keep writing and it just keeps flowing. And I sometimes, revise and I'll move things here and there. And which I did for Sankofa with the help of Frank. Frank actually helped me with that, which was, thank you, Frank, it was amazing. And so Sankofa came to pass. So it's really just feeling and being honest with what I feel and just putting it down. And however it sounds is my truth because it comes from what I feel and being most authentic, which, yeah.
It came out beautifully.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That I feel so lifted by that, Jameel. Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Frank has appeared, and I think will be taking us into the last part of the evening. So, I'll reconvene after that, Frank.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm just going to briefly introduce our speaker. Who is from the University of California, Irvine, as an associate clinical professor. She's an associate program director also of the UCI pediatric residency program, which is an exhausting thing to do. And to add to that, she's co-director of the Leadership Education to Advance Diversity in African, Black, and Caribbean communities at UCI and beyond. I've enjoyed very much meeting her and learning about her and her family. And she's going to cover the theme of hope is timeless. You're on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maskins. And honestly, just thank you everyone who has spoken thus far. And thank you to everyone in the audience who's here today, just for your time. And we know that your time is precious. So truly appreciate you for joining us in this space. And in starting, I do want to thank Dr. Shapiro, Dr. Maskins, and also Dr. S.L. Murray, who is one of the professors in the Claire Trevor School of the Arts. And she read one of my poems and listened to it and forwarded it to Dr. Maskins. And that was one of the reasons that I'm able to participate in this event. So definitely express gratitude. And in thinking about this theme of hope is timeless, I just want to pause reflect a little about why poetry really is just important and exciting to me. And in general, I find poetry to be igniting, and it draws you in and touches your spirit. It breathes life into hidden narratives and carries words and rhythms. And it offers hope and truly is a tool for healing. And I think that we've seen that thus far, and hope to share a little bit about how that's been the case for me as well. So to the latter point, many of the poems that I'm going to share with you were written as expressive reflections of inequities in health outcomes and clinical care, and racial trauma. And these inequities are magnified during the COVID pandemic. And we all are continuing to endure the impact of that. So as I share my poems today, I want to ask that you take time to first, in listening to the first poem, see in hope. To second, act in hope. And to third, rise in hope. So for the first poem, I want us to enter into this mental headspace, if you will, that allows you to consider being seen in hope. Evidence highlights the fact that inequities exist in the health outcomes and treatment of Black patients, many of which can be prevented. But what if we, as Black people, were always seen in hope? What would happen? And what could this mean for our care? So the title of this poem is Can You See Me? And in writing it, I was reflecting on the care my mother received while navigating diverse health systems for a multitude of health issues. And I served as her advocate before she passed away in 2017 from a disease called ALS. And there were doctors and nurses and allied health professionals who cared for her with compassion. But there were also some who did not see her as I saw her, as someone whose words mattered, as someone whose life was valued. And sadly, this poem also came to mind when the news of Dr. Susan Moore's death due to COVID-19 was brought to light. When we see our patients with hopeful eyes, they are seen in hope and treated with honor and respect. So the ask in this poem is stated through my mother's eyes. And it's, can you see me? So I'll share it with you now. Can you see me in the skin I'm in? Or does it seem like a disguise? Like a costume hiding what lies beyond my eyes? Can you hear me? Can you help me? Can you heal me in this time? Time of pain, time of suffering, time of mine. Can you pause and be present to see me and address my needs? Can you listen and care deeply to impart hope and believe? Can you care for me with kindness to show me patience seldom seen? Can you see me, really see me, and know all that my life means? Or if you can see me, see my value and my worth. You will treat me with dignity, respect deserved by all on this earth. So thank you for listening to that. And I want to step back into the themes that I mentioned before. So seeing in hope enables us to act in hope, which leads me to the next poem, or rather really more narrative of 3 thoughts. And it's titled Plant Seeds of Love. So this one is a little bit longer, so please bear with me through this. But I wrote it early in June 2020 after the death of George Floyd. And it has taken shape in diverse ways, and it continues to do so as it evolves. And to capture that fact, the title of the poem was initially Isolated, but I changed it to Plant Seeds of Love after reflecting on the purpose of the poem and the reason for me writing it. And I'd like to thank student doctors Kasaluchi Anindu and Kelton Mock, because they were the first to listen to the initial version and actually say, oh, that's pretty good. Oh my goodness, did you write that? And I was like, I did. And so that encouraged me to share it with others. So thank you for validating my words and supporting me at that time. And I present it humbly to you today as a marker of the fact that holding on to hope, acting in hope, it was healing. And Marcus, I also want to thank you because you made it okay to cry. And I laugh with that in that this poem also evokes a lot of emotion. So Plant Seeds of Love. Isolated, quarantined. I sit away from my husband, away from my sons, away from my family, away from my friends. Quarantined. Our nation is in a state of crisis. Hearts are broken. Lives have been lost. Lost to slavery, lost to segregation, lost to police brutality, lost to a virus. Lost. I am a Black woman, a daughter, sister, niece, cousin, friend, godmother, god sister, wife, daughter-in-law, mother, mentor, and mentee. And I'm a doctor, a pediatrician. As we each watch screens flooded with messaging about Black people dying, purposeful demonstrations and protests, I cannot help but think, what do our children see? Do our children see this world for what it is? What would we see if we looked at this world through a child's eyes? Would we believe we belonged here? Would we think we are safe? Would we trust that we all are truly a part of the human race? Would we feel loved? Would we feel confident? Would we feel positive about the next day? Would we feel that if we spoke, others would listen? Or would we think our breath could be taken away? I sit in isolation. I have been given much time to think with clarity about the future, think with keen awareness that we must change. My body feels like it's on fire, and the nation feels the same. Yet, I will act through writing. I will write because I must. And as I write, I remember that in God I trust. And in acting, I recognize that I am part of a broader team, a team whose children are trapped in isolation. In this time, like you and me, children separated from essential workers, children isolated by a pandemic that seems like it will never end, children muted by the trauma we all are experiencing, outspoken by suffering and hate. So team, refuse to stay silent. Refuse to rest in despair. Team, please speak louder. Please be louder. Be intentional as you look at your children, as you look at our children in the eyes. Talk, read, and sing with them, play with them, hug them, kiss them. Tell them they are loved. Be louder. Help our nation's children know that they matter, that Black lives matter. Help them stand for something more. They can be a better future than what has gone before. Please listen. Hear the voices of those in the present. Please learn. Review narratives from the past. Please act. Plant seeds of love. So in sharing this and thinking about how as love-filled communities grow, we can rise. And we can rise in hope. So I humbly present this last poem that I will be sharing this evening, which is titled, I Rise. And the title in and of itself gives reference to Maya Angelou. So Jameel, it's funny that you happened to mention her earlier. But Maya Angelou is a skilled and iconic author, poet, and orator who I deeply admire and I continue to admire. And scripture that I have leaned on heavily ever since medical school. I also wrote this poem after the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. And it was a call, if you will, to myself to continue to stand in hope, to rise in hope. And again, the title is I Rise. Today, I rise. Not because I want to in this moment, but because I must. I must think, I must serve, I must speak. Why? Because I can breathe. And with each breath, I have a voice. And with that voice, I will speak. I will speak for the voiceless. I will speak for the slain. I will speak and fight remnants of slavery's pain. And I will stand. I will stand against racism and stand against hate. I will stand for the beauty in being Black. I will stand and be. And today, as I stand on the shoulders of Maya Angelou and others who were great, still I rise, and I will continue to rise up on wings as eagles. And in concluding, I also want to share a quote by Maya Angelou. And she said, God puts rainbows in the clouds so that each of us in the dreariest and most dreaded moments can see a possibility of hope. In saying this, she concluded that each of us can try to be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud. And that is my ask to every single person in the audience today. Try to be a rainbow in someone else's cloud. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention. And I hope you all continue to enjoy this truly lovely evening. And I believe Gabriella Miyoto is next. Thank you.
Thank you, Candace. That was so beautiful. And thank you for your work with all our children. I'm Gabriella Miyoto. I'm a family physician. I work in community medicine. And what I'd like to say is really to give thanks not only to everyone who's here tonight and to all the UCI staff who put this together, but also to thank the Laguna Poets Workshop, because really it is because of their work with me and my work with them over the years that I think I've been able to really hold language in a way that has been so different for me in these past 10, 11 years. So I'm going to read two poems this evening. And I think for me as a family physician and someone who has loved poetry since childhood, someone who is really connected with shamanism and nature, I also realized that there is such a holding of witnessing suffering and then trying to know what to do with that suffering as a physician and just as a human being, all of us in this same boat. So these two poems are a little bit in relationship to that idea. What do we do with witnessing and what are we called forth to do? We do not need tear gas, Mr. President. We have already been weeping, watching a man beg for breath, beg for mercy, while the guardians of our civil liberties look on and take a life. Take a life. You who are a master at weaponizing words, listen now to our silence. Listen hard. Our silence of 8 minutes and 46 seconds. How many breaths would you take during that time? What if your cheek were ground into the street, bread still in your stomach? What if you had survived COVID-19, survived the blocked arteries of your heart, and were now dying from a knee on the neck? A knee has no place on a neck. Ask anyone, even the youngest child knows that. Now we walk and chant and write poems with broken and angry hearts, and we tell you, you cannot curb this fire, no matter what time you start the curfew. And Mr. George Floyd, I read your autopsy. Forgive me for knowing of your blue tattoos, of names of those close to you, and of the eagle on your chest. We were eyewitnesses to your torture, and I needed to know you a little better. This other poem, 4th of July, 2018, I actually wrote after witnessing, don't want to do badly to her name. I think it was Patricia Okumu, when she came up on the Statue of Liberty itself physically as a way to protest the separation of children from their parents. And I think the other reason the Statue of Liberty is so important to me is because my parents, being both Italian immigrants, I remember my father telling me about seeing the Statue of Liberty as he arrived. So this is for all of us. 4th of July, 2018. Lady Liberty, can I borrow your sandals? I know it is a funny question, and I would only ask it on a day without rain, so you would not tumble off the pedestal that men have made for you. Yes, I know these sandals are way too big for me, but I think perhaps between the ridges of the sole, I might find ashes from your torch, buffalo hair from the prairies, sweat from those who have landed here, tempest tossed. And with these ingredients, my friends and I would like to form new clay, make a talisman, something we could wear over our hearts to help us recognize each other, whether standing or kneeling, in this land of the free, this home of the brave. Thank you. I'll now hand it over to Frank.
Hi.
Sorry, a little disconnect there. That was beautiful. I just have a brief heads up to give you a pre-comment before I read this poem. I died many times before I was about 7 years old because of a serious illness which I've had, which has come back to haunt me at numerous times throughout my life, although I have pretty much kept it under wraps until the last few years. And 3 or 4 years ago, I had a very serious disease called myasthenia gravis that was misdiagnosed for 2 years, and I almost died. But fortunately, I received treatment for it. But then, just 2 weeks after I felt better, I was called, my heart had problems, which I'll tell you about. And I spent 46 days in the hospital after a cardiac bypass. It took me a long time to recover from that, and it wasn't until after I wrote many memoirs that my memory began to come back. And finally, in the summer, I was able to write a poem, and this is the poem that came out. It's called Celestial Embrace, a visit to the healing place, home for 46 days and nights, distant past, present, and future coming together on the 7th floor. I sensed that my heart was unwell, skipping beats in the middle of the night, awakening me to the urgency of that moment. An arteriogram brought unwelcome news, blood no longer flowing where it was supposed to go, blockages everywhere. A triple bypass necessary, or my life would be short. An easy decision, sternum split, veins removed and reattached, remodeling the flow to be life-giving. Now 3 months later, healing from my wounds, physicality returning, my mind injured, repair is slowed by the damage within. From 3 decades ago, a remembrance of my life at age 3, my mother screaming, "Frankie's dying, no, no." Looking down from heaven, I saw a nurse and my mother holding my hands, the panic in my mother's voice calling me back, releasing me from the pull of the gleaming light. I floated down to my mother's arms and opened my eyes in fright. The encounter burnt forever into my mind. 7 decades have now passed. I have seen dying and death again and again, 10,000 patients, countless nurses, imprinting compassion on my soul. Each nurse offering their quiet wisdom to every patient as I have become. Kindness blossoming into a tenderness that has bound me to them forever. Florence Nightingales in disguise, welcoming clumsiness with a smile and understanding. I will remember their gestures for eternity in my soul. Now 3 months home again, memories beckoning me to recall another life, as if I were still a baby hearing no, no. Taking my hands in hers, the nurses on earth offers healing to the weakened body. Angels living in my consciousness, roses in a spring bouquet. Their beauty and kindness imparting hope, protecting me in a celestial embrace.
Thank you so much, Frank. It was very
I usually can't read that without crying, but I read it about 8 times today, so I wouldn't cry.
well. I think tears are our most precious currency, and to be spent. And this is, yeah. I'd like to invite everyone to come back, even people who were not in this last group. And I will again field questions from our audience. I was very struck this last segment of the evening. It was called Clinical Perspectives, and every poet spoke so profoundly about a moment of perspective shift, whether it was Frank's looking down suddenly from above, or Candace asking what our children see, or Gabriella looking where I would never have thought to look, at the tattoos or the sandals of the Statue of Liberty. And I want to thank everyone for your perspective and for changing mine and for all there is to learn from that. But I want to make sure that our audience gets a chance to share their perspectives on what we have all been so privileged to experience tonight. So I am going to read some comments, and so far I don't see a specific question, but I see some comments that are worth reading. Dr. Taylor Lucas writes, Johanna, your words were so beautiful, and the message to choose hope and channel pain into beauty will stay with me for a while. Thank you so much. Cindy says, what a powerful story. And Anna, I truly feel healed and hopeful. Thank you. Let me just see if there are more questions here. I don't see any. I think that's really, waiting for a moment, there were some earlier questions for other poets, which I might go back and pick up on. I wanted to ask all of you very quickly. I am very struck by the moment that we're living in, which is a moment where we have nothing to do but learn and to teach each other. And this motif ran through virtually every poem that was read tonight. This question of what we learn from our children and what we have to teach to others. And I'm just wondering if anyone would like to comment on what is the most important thing you feel we need to learn right now, or what is the most important thing that you feel you have learned from what we are all going through at this moment? It's just an open question, attempting to address what I think is a thread that ran throughout the entire evening. So anyone who wants to take it up can feel free to do that.
I'll be glad to answer. There's so many people rushing to. What I've learned is, number one, that that God is in control. No matter how much I try to think I am or whatever else is going on, that God is ultimately who is in control. And I've also learned how important it is to be still, how important it is to not only be reliable to our jobs and our children, our families, but to ourselves, and just be that companion that we need, and just be able to love on ourselves through this time and just be still and being okay with being still. I guess just being okay with where you are and what you are and loving it until it gets better.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd just like to add, this particular thought comes a lot from Candace's poem, but really, as you say, Jayne, it's a thread that inspired all of these works. And I just come away with the feeling that hope and healing, which were themes of this symposium, they're kind of moral imperatives. And, you know, we can say, well, there's this evidence that we should hope, but I think that hope goes far beyond that, that it has little to do with research or credibility and more to do with our faith in the future, our faith in future generations. And so I kind of, for me personally, I take on hope, not necessarily because it's justified to hope, but because I feel I must.
That's that is so perfect a segue into a question that just came up, which I wanted to interject because the question is from Cindy. It's, where does Dr. Candace get her hope? So I wondered if maybe you would like to answer that question, Candace.
I love that question.
It's a great
so
question.
thankful to also just kind of build off of what Johanna was just saying too. And I think we have to fight, like it's a fight to hope sometimes. You have to fight and be okay with that wrestle and know that, gosh, I can't see hope. Let me carve out a little slit so I can see just a little bit of light of hope. So I can peek through that slit. If I can peek through that slit and see hope, and maybe I can start to pry it a little wider, and I'm starting to shake and just pushing it open and pushing it open. And my hope comes from the Lord. My hope is from my faith, and I humbly lean on my faith and family and friends and continue truthfully to be inspired by our younger generations. And so I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, I am a co-director of the Lead ABC Scholars, and our scholars are phenomenal. Our medical students are phenomenal. Pre-health students, students broadly, younger people in our world right now, I think have really stepped in a way that has highlighted the fact that the politics of hierarchies don't really need to be in play. Like, we are limiting our ability to move forward when we don't allow ourselves to cut that slit and, hey, let's all push this slit open together. Like, maybe I don't have to hope alone. Like, I don't need to be in this space of trying to hope by myself. Sometimes that hope is like you're getting the energy of others, so you have the power to be able to pry that open. And I am blessed to have a supportive family, to be surrounded by inspirational individuals, to be inspired by those on this panel today. And but my faith definitely is an anchor for my hope. So thank you, Cindy, for asking that.
I think also just a number of other comments really speak to the way that you have your work that you've shared with us tonight has created a community of hope here. So just to read a couple of others, which are very relevant to this, from K2 Cataract. Dr. Lucas, I loved your poems about seeing, hearing, and holding on to hope. They were so powerful. Thank you. It is wonderful to think of you as a healer, a powerful doctor for children. I think there's such an important thing being said there too about what we need our physicians to give us, and the ways that, the poet is a physician as well, giving that particular gift. Johanna also writes, Dr. Taylor Lucas, your words were so beautiful, and the message to choose hope and channel pain into beauty will stay with me for a while. Thank you so much. So this is, I think, our truest thread of the evening. And I think that's pretty much, those are the comments that that I'm seeing there. There was one from earlier, I want to make sure that this is voiced, Jameel, it was for you. Someone was noticing that you had been a designer. I hope you're still there. Right now you're not on the screen, but was wondering about what you had designed and if that sense of design had come into your poems. So just that there was that question, which I didn't get to before.
Okay, final comments. I know we could go on for several hours or days probably, but
I'll be quick. I did design what I'm wearing. I actually made what I'm wearing today. This is our
gosh, yeah.
So I made what I'm wearing. I am a fashion designer. I saw someone posted in the chat, shopmoma.com, which is the name of my brand. And this is just one of the pieces. It's a loungewear, it's easy to wear. And yes, I did make it.
Okay.
Flowy clothes are in right now. That's what everybody wants.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for being so gracious and surviving all the IT problems. I was exposed to a great poet in my philosophy class in UCLA, at the University of San Francisco, of all courses, philosophy. And the philosophy said that, philosopher who was teaching the course said that hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, written over 150 years ago. Well, it is certainly in my soul, and I hope everybody flies. Goodbye.
Thank you.